Welcome to Dory Cote on Shamanism, a weekly podcast that explores one theme in shamanism throughout each month. Get comfortable, have a seat, and let's get started.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this month's podcast. Our topic this month is, who is your God? And this week specifically, we're going to be talking about God and language.
Dory, please share with us what you mean by the topic God and language.
Well, I'd be happy to talk about that. I was inspired by my helping spirits to talk about this particular topic because it came to me in a conversation with a dear friend not long ago that when we were talking about God, we thought we were talking about the same entity. And it turns out that we actually have very different understandings about who is God in our lives. And so then that led me to recognize that how we use language in describing God is a really important part of how we entertain with others the whole topic of God. Because God is a word that is a huge brush stroke. If you can imagine like looking at, an open sky that is limitless, that would be how you would see the word God, just, limitless possibilities of what that might mean to somebody. And, within that sky, if you're looking at a night sky, there are many, many stars. And within each star is yet another, cosmic energy. So that's how many gods there are potentially out there, because for each person, God is their own unique understanding. And so I am really focusing these days on inquiring more of individuals about what they mean when they say God. What does that language mean to you? Does it mean, an old man in the sky with a long beard? Does it mean some energy that you can't describe? Does it mean some power that you believe can intercede in any situation that you're in? What does the word God mean to you? And then, of course, there are many different sub words that are used in the expression of God, because some people's God is a specific entity, somebody who lived on the earth at one time. And we're going to talk more about that in another podcast. But so the use of language in understanding what is God, who is God, how do we language for ourselves what that means? And I think until we have all internally explored, what do I mean when I say God? What do I mean? What does that mean to me? Then that word really is somewhat meaningless unless we've gone inside and identified for ourselves what the word God means to us individually.
The process of inquiry itself is an important process.
As I understand it, as I see it, yes, the inquiry within yourself of, who is God? Who is God? Because it's a big word. We say, I'm praying to God. Well, who is God? Who are you praying to? Because who I'm praying to may not be the same as the quote God that you're praying to. And how do we come to understand each other when we talk about God?
So are you saying that this force, this entity outside ourselves, can it be defined? And what draws people for centuries to try and define it?
Well, there's the rub. You see, I believe that we are all, as humans, struggling to define God. It's a word, right? God is a word that we, as humans, invented to describe what I believe is in many ways indescribable. It's a force, it's a power, it's universal energy. There's so many different ways to language that word. And so if we try to nail down God by just using one word, this word G-O-D with a capital G sometimes, and other people choose not to put a capital G. If we just use that one word, then we can be in conversations with people, assuming that we are all coming from the same place in terms of our own individual belief about what that one word means, without really understanding each other at all. This is like if I say, I like bread. Well, what kind of bread? There are many, many different kinds of bread. It so depends upon what part of the world you live in. If you live in India, you're eating something that looks a lot more like naan. If you live in Africa, you're eating something that is, pounded on stone and probably hard and crusty. If you live in the United States, somebody might be talking about Wonder Bread. Or somebody else might be talking about some luscious sourdough bread from California. So it's a word, and it cannot be contained in one definition. We have to be more clear with each other about who we are in fact talking about, or what we are talking about. For some people, the word God implies a living being. For some people, God actually, in their mind's eye, as I said earlier, is a being that to them has something that looks like a human body. And for other people, the word God means some indescribable force. For other people, the word God might mean a compilation of the power and energy of all beings who are connected with one another, and in that becomes God. So the whole reason I'm curious about exploring the word God and language is to help draw people to be more clear with each other about God. What does it mean to you? And what has drawn people for centuries to try to define God? There have been so many books written. Theologians have explored the word God. Theologians and philosophers and visionaries and mystics and, people who have written books after books after books, including, biblical books that dissect the Bible and what have you, trying to define God. And yet, I believe we are trying to define in language something that is actually not able to be defined. It defies being defined. And it's a curiosity to me. It's curious to me that we spend so much time and energy trying to define an energy or a being or a power that is outside of language, and yet we insist on putting language to it. And so I don't have the answer to that question. What draws people for centuries to try to define God? I don't know what drives people. I think, we're all really curious about, well, who is God? So we write about it, we think about it, we pray to a God we often don't even know who or what we're praying to, and yet we believe that there's some power outside of ourselves, and we call it God.
Since studying shamanism, I've been particularly confused about this because
Hmm.
we have helping animals that we can call upon, the
Hmm.
same way that what I've been taught growing up in my religion to call upon God.
Absolutely. And
And
go ahead.
and
Sorry.
therein lies the rub, because
There.
they both share that universal energy and the force, that divine force. I've been thinking about Roman and Greek mythology, where they had hierarchies of gods. And even the Catholic Church has hierarchies of saints. So you can pray to a saint the way you would pray to a god, just like you could um, invoke your helping spirits. And that, for me, when I do my old school prayers of Dear God in Heaven, confuses the heck out of me some days.
Yes, I'm with you on that. And that's precisely what drew me to talk about this particular topic, because it is confusing. You know, as a shamanic practitioner and someone who has an amazing relationship with many helping spirits, some in animal form, others in more human-like form. It's a bit of a conundrum, because who I call upon for help isn't God as such. It is the mystical power of these spirits who I connect with outside of space and time. And yet I also know they truly do not have form. They, you know, we give them form. That's the source of our imagination and our need to create form out of something that is formless. So when I communicate with a spirit animal such as fox, which is not one of my power animals, but, you know, let's say I'm communicating with the spirit of fox, I'm communicating with an undefinable energy that is not in a body, is not really, doesn't take up space. In other words, it doesn't have any materiality to it, but yet it is very real to me. And so it is, I think, really highly confusing. And for those of us who grew up in, you know, an organized religion, and yet are you know, shamanic practitioners, or believe in shamanism, I think it is even more confusing, because we still sometimes go back to those old ways that we were um, brought up in, you know, to quote, pray to God in heaven. And what does that mean, really? Who in fact are we praying to? It's words, but what is behind the words?
And some of the gods or spirit animals that we invoke or connect with for help have specialities. Like St. Christopher can find lost things and help sell real estate. And different saints have been known to be particularly adept in certain supplications, similarly to spirit animals as well.
Yes, that is absolutely true. There, you know, we could converse about this for a really, really long time, just like there are people who have written many books on this topic. And yet, you know, my curiosity is, how do we try to define the undefinable? It's curious to me that we do that.
What would you say to someone who does not believe in God?
I would say to somebody who does not believe in God that that they're using those words to describe um, what they have been told God is. So somebody who says, I don't believe in God, I don't believe in that at all, then if from my perspective, what they're saying is, you know, I don't believe in some being that is outside of myself, that has power and is compassionate and is love and is available to me. when in fact many people who say they don't believe in God really do believe in some power which is separate from themselves. For instance, many people say, God doesn't exist for me. My church is out there when I go fishing, um, or my belief is that the wind and the sun and the moon are the powers that I can connect with. Well, to them, that is their God, even though it doesn't fall into the category of what most common people would refer to as God. I do, remember for myself a period of time in my own life when I really, was at the bottom of my emotional life. I was highly depressed. I was in a really, really bad place. And this was in my, um, mid 20s for a period of a few years. And I truly believed that I did not believe in God. And yet I was pushed to the brink where I had to find some spiritual connection for myself, or I knew that my life would have very little value and would be really hanging on the edge of a ledge. And so for me, my God became a tree. And the tree became a power to me that I couldn't understand. I couldn't understand what makes a tree. What is behind. I mean, we all know the science of the tree. It grows leaves, and then the sap goes down into the roots, and the tree and the leaves fall off, and all. We all know that. Yes, okay. But what really is behind the power of a tree? How does that happen? So that became my God. And I was able to put my hands on the tree, talk to the tree, and really look to the tree as a power that was outside of myself, and yet that I didn't call God. I called it tree, but it was a power. And so, my advice to people who say they don't believe in God is find something that you can identify with that is really beyond your capacity to truly understand with a cognitive self, and allow that to be that power that you trust, that you believe in. Because without that spiritual nature of ourselves, we truly are lost. I mean, we forget that we are body, mind, spirit. And in order to keep the spirit alive, we have to have that something, that touchstone that we can tap into to feed our battery, so to speak. So, so going back to what I said earlier, I truly believe that most people have a God. They just don't always know what it is. And if they don't know what it is, then it's incumbent upon them to find some entity, some thing that they are able to identify as God. And I don't mean alcohol or tobacco. I'm talking about something that has life. Some people say, my God is in this bottle of beer. Well, not really. That's escapism. That's being sarcastic and not really true to yourself. If you want to have a God, then you have to have some being that is alive, something that has a life force that you can rely on and trust. And that can be your God, like the tree became the God for me.
Do you have anything else you would like to add on this topic of God and language at this time?
No, other than to say, I love to have dialogue about this, because it just is an interesting thing to me that we have one word that that describes so many different possibilities. And it's a limitation of our English language, at least, that we only have one word to describe so many, a cornucopia of possibilities of what people actually believe in.
Thank you for listening to Dory Cote on shamanism. We'd love to hear your thoughts, stories, reactions, and questions. Come on over to dorycote.com and join the conversation. And tune in next week for more on this subject, or next month for a new subject. You can subscribe to this podcast in iTunes or sign up on dorycote.com to receive notices when the podcasts are posted. That's Dory, D-O-R-Y, and Cote, C-O-T-E.com. Drumming and rattling by Dory Cote and Terry Morgan. Technical assistance and audio production by JillHackett.com. And this is Susan Savelle, wishing you many blessings in your life. We hope to have you join us next time.